This month we have 5 new catalog Blu-ray releases from Fox, and I'm going to start with one of my personal favorites, which I think is kind of an underrated action film, and it is The Edge, starring Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins. Of course, Alec Baldwin doing one of his last dramatic roles before he just became kind of a caricature of himself and started switching to mostly comedy. Anthony Hopkins doing what Anthony Hopkins did best before he kind of became a parody of himself and just started showing up as the crotchety old British guy. This is a film in which both of these guys really still show that they can act, and I think, in my opinion, it's one of the last great movies the two of them made. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin versus a bear. And that's kind of true, but actually it's a survival story, which I've always found fascinating. It's two men surviving in the Arctic wilderness, and yes, there is a bear involved, but it's actually a surprisingly good thriller. I remember seeing it in theaters and just being blown away by it, and it actually holds up pretty well on Blu-ray. No thanks to the Blu-ray transfer, which really doesn't help in any way, shape, or form. It's littered with digital artifacts, and it's a little bit excessively grainy, and it's just not a great transfer. Color saturation is good at best, but not great, and the picture quality really just doesn't look like it's been remastered or redone for high definition in any way, shape, or form. It kind of looks like they took a DVD master and slapped it onto a Blu-ray, which very well may be the case, but is somewhat of a disappointment considering how much I enjoy this film. On top of that, there are no extra features whatsoever, so Fox really is giving this one kind of the catalog title dump treatment, and I find that a little bit disappointing because it is such a good film. But all those negatives being said, if you haven't seen the movie, I definitely recommend checking it out, and it is still a little bit better on Blu-ray than it is on DVD, if for no other reason than thanks to a pretty good soundtrack that really does take advantage of the surround channels and kind of bring the wilderness to life, and really gets the action sequences, giving your speakers and your zero point 0.1 bass LFE speaker a pretty good workout. So definitely check this film out if you have not seen it, and if you have and you don't own it, this might be the chance to upgrade, even though it's really not everything it could have been. Next, we have a Steven Seagal catalog title, Marked for Death. Yes, this is Steven Seagal back when he used to still make hit movies, and this one for me was kind of where he started to decline a little bit. Even though it was a big hit, I felt like it was pretty over the top. Even as a teenager, I recognized that this movie just wasn't that great, and it certainly didn't capture kind of the coolness of his first couple, like Hard to Kill and Above the Law, that even though they might be a little cheesy today, were pretty exciting when I was a teenager. This one sort of sees Steven Seagal going up against a bunch of Jamaican drug kingpins, and there's a few cool action scenes, but the script is pretty terrible. Not that that's a big surprise, and it just doesn't quite live up to the greatness, if you will, of the couple of early Steven Seagal films that kind of launched him into the action hero stratosphere and made him sort of a household name. Now, this transfers a little better than The Edge, although the picture quality is still a little bit soft, and there's still some excessive grain from time to time, but you do also get a pretty good surround soundtrack. It's not as great as it could be for an action film. I'd like to see a little bit more activity from the rear speakers, but that being said, it certainly isn't a dull soundtrack that doesn't give you any bang for your buck. Unfortunately, there are no extra features on this DVD either, so once again, we have kind of that catalog dump that Fox is giving us, as opposed to, putting whatever materials they had at hand onto the disc, which is really what Blu-ray is for. Next, we have 3 Mel Brooks releases: History of the World Part 1, Robin Hood Men in Tights, and High Anxiety. Now, Fox has done a slightly better job with these. These are the 3 remaining titles that were put out on Blu-ray that were in the Mel Brooks box set, the Blu-ray box set that came out last year, and are not yet available as single titles until now, of course, that is. And for the most part, I enjoy these films. I definitely like History of the World Part 1. It's a little scattered, but it's some great Mel Brooks comedy. And Robin Hood Men in Tights, while it's later Brooks and certainly not his best film, I have a soft spot in my heart for it because, well, I was a teenager when it came out, and I saw it in theaters, and I laughed my butt off, and I still find a lot to chuckle about when I watch the film. High Anxiety is, as much as I would think it would be my favorite because it's kind of an homage to Hitchcock, and I'm a huge Hitchcock fan, it kind of comes and goes and fits in spurts. It's not a great film. It has a few good gags in it, but it's ultimately kind of on the silly side. It's also the weakest of the transfers and soundtracks on Blu-ray. Both History of the World Part 1 and Robin Hood Men in Tights look surprisingly good on Blu-ray considering their age. They've got really bright colors and a good, clean crisp, clear imagery that actually took me a little bit by surprise considering the age of the films. But High Anxiety kind of looks like a 30-year-old film you would expect to look on Blu-ray. It doesn't seem to have had as much done to it. Likewise, the soundtrack is kind of a front-centered affair, whereas both History of the World Part 1 and Robin Hood Men in Tights do get a little bit of rear channel activity in there. None of them are fully immersive soundtrack mixes like you might hope for, but definitely Men in Tights and History of the World are better in terms of their audio-visual components. Now, for extra features, this time around at least, these films have not been dumped in a catalog dumped, as I like to say, partially because the features already existed for the Mel Brooks box set. But here's what you get. On History of the World Part 1, you get Musical Mel Inventing the Inquisition featurette, which is in high definition. Making History, Mel Brooks Uncreating the World, another high definition featurette, and a Real History of the World trivia track, as well as an isolated score track. Then, on Robin Hood Men in Tights, we get two more featurettes. Funny Men in Tights, 3 Generations of Comedy, which is an HD, and Robin Hood Men in Tights, The Legend Had It Coming, an old HBO special. That's not an HD. You also get commentary by Mel Brooks, and once again, an isolated score track. Finally, you have High Anxiety, with one high-definition featurette called Hitchcock and Mel Spoofing the Master of Suspense. Then there's the Am I Very, Very Nervous test, and a trivia track called Don't Get Anxious, the Trivia of Hitchcock. And, of course, finally, you get an isolated score track. So, some good extra features for you there. If you're a big Mel Brooks fan, I definitely recommend the Mel Brooks box set. I think it's the way to go. But if you already had some of the discs and didn't want to purchase the whole box set and you just want to kind of finish out your collection, all 3 of these are worthy additions to your collection, maybe with the exception of High Anxiety, which is the weakest of the 3.